Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to this month Meet the Banking Experts live event. I'm joined today by Stuart Eden, one of our lead consultant and subject matter experts in finance transformation for the banking industry. Hi, Stuart, how are you doing?
Hey, Nicholas, I'm doing very well. Nice to be here.
Yeah, very good, very good. So, let's get right into it. As a reminder, you can ask all your questions in the comment section on LinkedIn, or you can send us an email at info@legerityfinancials.com, and we'll do our very best to answer those questions during the event. But if we don't, we'll make sure to get back to you after. So, Stuart, the first question is really, I just want for you to give a little bit your view on why control and auditability across accounting process is such an important area.
Sure, thanks, Nicholas. I guess I'm an accountant, so this is kind of in my DNA. And we're trained and qualified to make sure that everything ties out and can be validated and reconciled. But we see and have seen over the years, some sort of pretty horrific incidents and pretty significant consequences of when things go wrong. I think the first one I can remember seeing sort of close hand was when Nick Leeson managed to bring down ING bearings in 1995, I think that was. I was working in banking at that stage, not at ING, but that sort of sent a real shockwave through the industry. And then there's been sort of others that have come along after that. We had obviously Enron in 2001. We had there's the UBS incident with quickly auditability in their prime services business in 2011. And all of those, in some way, shape, or form, functions of controls not working properly, both in the front office and in the back office. The sort of preventative and detective controls in both areas. And I think that the challenge has become more and more difficult, particularly in complex businesses like financial services. So, typical organization will have a number of client-facing systems holding transactions and the detail and the history. And there'll be a set of processes that take this information through one of more sort of transformations and to create the accounting views. These then get consolidated in some fashion to meet an organization's reporting requirements. Organizations clearly need to be able to validate those numbers that are in their financial statements and in their other sort of filings, regulatory returns, etc. And this becomes more and more difficult as we get into these complex sort of businesses and areas, and sometimes it's just the legacy infrastructure with old technology and old data that makes that challenge. I think we're seen as a reaction to some of the incidents like Enron and the Nick Leeson incident. The regulators are starting to get more involved. So it's becoming increasingly important for an organisation to be able to meet these sort of regulatory burdens that have come in. And good examples are sort of SOX 404, which I think pretty directly came in off the back of Enron. And then BCBS 239 is a more recent one, which is trying to get the risk data and the finance data more closely aligned. And that's creating or forcing companies to invest a significant amount of energy, time, and money and resources to meeting these standards.
Very good. Thanks. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges in this area.
Sure. I think I've probably touched on a couple of them already, but I think the traceability and auditability of the reported numbers is the real headline challenge. For a number that is sort of in the general ledger or in the consolidated financial statements, it'll be an amalgamation of a lot of things that have happened upstream, often from multiple source systems, probably different data structures, aggregation rules, and validating a single number back to its sources to verify it and say that, yep, that's a good number is really, really challenging. And companies develop very complex and costly control processes to do that. Often some with more success than others. I think some of the specific challenges that we come across would include, firstly, I think consistency. So larger organizations tend to have a lot of systems that hold source data. That's often in different data structures, which makes it hard to amalgamate. And quite often they have their own sort of accounting sub-processes that are hard to see, particularly in older ones, and harder to unpick if there's a problem. So we get different rules, different data structures, which means that you're not, when you get to the final accounting numbers, you're not always got apples and apples to add together. So, and taking that final number and being able to drill back to prove the original source transactions is often really difficult. I think the next one is very much a data one. I mean, data is the real theme here in a lot of these. But data completeness is very much a challenge. So you can process all your data, but how do you know you've got all your data that you've processed? So that again relies on controls that organisations need to put in place. Quite often that's a sort of a source to target reconciliation. So if I've got 100 in my general ledger, do I have 100 in my source system? So my transaction system that I started with, or has that sort of changed through its journey? So and with multiple numbers being amalgamated, validating of those sort of 100 and 100 is very, very challenging. So that's definitely a challenge. I think a lot of organisations have approached these issues through building manual controls and processes. So I think the next real risk is the sort of the operational risk that sits around these. You end up with teams doing quite complex reconciliations and running these manual controls. As time goes on, those become sort of harder to maintain. Team members leave, there's maybe not the right handover, and the new individuals that start picking up the controls aren't always necessarily as familiar as the previous incumbents. So managing these on an ongoing basis, and particularly as businesses become more complex and the reporting requirements equally become more complex, again, that's another very challenging area. I think the third one, or sorry, the final one is really just the cost of all of this. If you've got legacy infrastructure, you've got a lot of people running manual controls, you've got people checking that the manual controls are being executed correctly, it becomes a very expensive operation to just get the integrity of the financial information. And with that, and with pressures on organisations to be profitable, there is a desire to sort of cut costs, and quite often these are sort of real target areas for people to try and cut costs and focus on some of these areas from a cost cutting perspective, and that usually has probably not very positive consequences.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, you highlighted some of the main challenges, the risk and the complexity around the control for all the manual processes, the data, as you mentioned. But really, how do you see companies like approaching these challenges? What they can do in order to get out of that?
Yeah, I think first everyone starts with a set of manual processes and controls. I think that's always the start place. New rules come in, or people need to be compliant with existing rules. They look at their business and say, well, that can't be that hard. Let's build some manual processes, we'll put some month-end reconciliations in place, put a validation process in place. And that can work for a while, but over time, I think the external pressures, particularly from the regulators and auditors, mean these standards that they have to achieve get harder and harder, or higher and higher. And I think that's particularly evident in heavily regulated industries such as financial services, where it's probably gone the furthest to date in terms of the reach of these rules and regulations. So I think organisations do get to a point where they think that the operational risk is just too much and too high, and they really then start to build an investment case around some sort of re-engineering technology type solutions. So I think manual to start with, then a sort of a creeping realisation that they need to go to something a little bit more sophisticated.
Okay, no, very good. And that brings me to a question a little bit more, the Insight Software FastPost question. How does an accounting hub and a subledger solution help to address these issues?
Sure. I mean, as I sort of touched on earlier, a lot of the challenges are around data and inconsistency and standardization. I think that's really what you get from Accounting Hub and Subledger Solution. It's really delivering that consistency and standardization. So an Accounting Hub or Subledger such as Legerity FastPost allows clients to build this their controls from within their primary finance and accounting architecture. And this starts with, in certainly FastPost, a set of standard data APIs. We use those to map disparate source data against FastPost industry standard data models. We then apply data validation rules within the data manager to make sure that all the critical data attributes are there and checked for completeness and accuracy against clients' pre-configured validation rules. The data then is processed through a set of standard accounting rules. So we get a standard set of data and we have a standard set of accounting rules to ensure that regardless of what happened upstream of the subledger and the Accounting Hub, once it gets in there, it's all starting to look very consistent. And so we use these standard accounting rules to post into the subledger and create balances at a very, very granular level across a number of dimensions. And that gives us a very rich data set that we use to support sort of controls and reconciliations. So we've validated the data and we've standardized the postings and we've stored it in a very granular fashion, which gives us a lot of ability to drill down and interrogate the information. This granular data is then used to provide the sort of the reporting requirements, be that regulatory reporting, be that feeds into general ledgers, so it's the detailed double entry that drives all of that. So you know that what ends up in your financial statements, books and records information is consistent with what goes into your reg reporting and any other external reporting that you may have. A tool like FastPost also has very strong traceability back through the system. So you can take a balance in the subledger and you can drill your way back through that to get right back to the original source data that was loaded. And it's a very sort of online screen-based access sort of process where you just take your balance and start clicking through it to get back to the source data. So if you need to investigate a balance or there's an issue you don't understand, you can very quickly work out what was the accounting rule that was applied and check that was correct. What's happened to the data on the way in terms of transformations, and go right back to the actual source data that we received in the first instance. So you've got that full end-to-end traceability.
Okay, yeah, that's a very good description of all the benefits and the value of the Accounting Hub in order to deliver the control and the auditability needed. If we go now to the next, so we had a little bit of discussion around the different challenges and how people approach that, discuss the technology with the Accounting Hub, but now let's get a little bit into the project delivery. Okay, so what is required in a project at addressing those changes?
Sure. I mean, and that, having recognized that you need to do something about it and the process of doing something about it, it's easy to recognize that it's quite often hard to do something about it and to fix it. Because, we are dealing in complex sort of environments with lots of different source systems and that. So the first thing you need to do is to design a sort of a migration roadmap, detailing the phases and the transition states that will be delivered through the project. So you need to have a look at what your environment is. Are there any drivers that are causing you to work in one area more quickly than another area? Perhaps upstream systems have been changed, which is a business case or a use case to do that. Perhaps it's an obsolescence issue or a challenge. Perhaps it's just an area of very high operational risk that you're, as an organisation, you're looking at. So you'd take all those factors into your decision making, and you'd come up with a sort of a logical migration roadmap around that. And that will give you a set of transition states, because you're never going to do this in one go. So you need to work out how you're going to, over time, move from all your legacy environment platforms to your new state, your target state. So you have a number of transition states, and that could happen over all those. You could have those states for being various transition states for a number of years. And in each one of those transition states, you need to then work out how am I going to control that. And, there is risk in doing one of these projects around these transition states because you've got a bit of a mixture of your old legacy world and you've obviously got your new, hopefully improved world. And managing the two states in parallel for a period of time is challenging. So you have to be very, very thoughtful around your control model and how you're going to make that work together across those two environments. Once you get comfortable with that, then you need to start doing your detailed planning. So for each of your migration phases that you're going to do, and you're not going to do your detailed plan for all of them up front, but certainly for the first one that you need to do, you need to go in and start doing your detailed plan, picking up all the typical aspects that you would that you use in a normal project plan. So looking at your data, thinking about your data sourcing, what are the right sources, what's the right data, do you need to do anything to the data to improve it as you bring it in, your actual build and unit testing as you're going through, so the initial sort of configuration of the rules, the unit testing you would do through that, through to the sort of the actual the more user acceptance phases around testing. So your system integration test, your UAT, any sort of parallel run. Typically, you'll do some sort of parallel run on a project with very high complexity to make sure that you're really comfortable with the results. You'd have a technical integration phase to get the technology all working properly together as well. So over a period of those phases, you would work through that and get to a point where everyone's comfortable. And fingers crossed, hopefully go live in a series of sequence go lives through the migration phases.
Yeah, and I think you discussed quite a lot this phase, but when we speak with a lot of banks, they usually have an audit, so they have like a key event that makes it a priority for them to improve audit and control in order to be compliant, and therefore they're kind of worried on how can they implement better auditability and control in incremental project, and how it always looked like a massive task and a big transformation, but how can you have success rapidly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's absolutely right. It's if you're going to start, you're normally doing this because there's a business case. You're not doing this for fun usually. So you're doing this because there is a problem you need to solve, and you want to solve the problem, as quickly as you can and as easily as you can. So I think it does come back to that transition roadmap that I mentioned earlier. You will have a number of various transition states. You will have a lot of factors that drive that roadmap. And I think you touched on the sort of maybe some external order issues or regulatory concerns perhaps. Where there are a number of banks in the industry at the moment that are under pressure from regulators to improve their controls, and some of those are well documented. So those become very much sort of factors in that whole decision-making process, as do other things like perhaps a system has been replaced in your client-facing environment, and so there's a real use case to do something around that. So that's not necessarily driven by control, but that would be another sort of factor that would come into your roadmap. So there'll be a lot of factors into that. But once you've got that roadmap in place, you really just have to make sure that you're very thoughtful around that the control model, particularly while you're running in sort of this dual world of legacy and more strategic. So that becomes really, really important to think through that. Work with, maybe work with some of your external parties, such as your auditors, to get their buy-in as you go along to this journey to make sure they're comfortable with it. I've seen it happen many times before where people have done things that look very well intended, and then they show up to the auditors, and the auditors say, actually, no, we think that's a problem, or we don't like it done that way, or that's not going to work for us. So it's always important to engage your external partners as you go through this journey as well.
And maybe just another question I want you to be on it, like as Insight Software, FastPost, what makes our team kind of very good at delivering those projects quickly?
Well, I think it's because we're already old. We've been around in the industry a long time. We've got a lot of experience. I think. Joking aside, I do think having worked in the industry for a long period of time, and a number of us have, so we have in-depth sort of knowledge and experience. We've all got grey hair because we've seen things go wrong many times in the past, and we've had to get involved in fixing them. So. We do bring a very sort of strong and experienced team into these projects. We've got a lot of ideas and thoughts. Legerity FastPost is a very, very flexible tool, and it allows us to be very creative in terms of how we do things and how we build reports and controls around managing business and supporting the business. So I think that's certainly what we bring to the party.
Yeah, and it's true that when I look at the project where we actually have to think differently than some more technology project where it's all about the coding, the building, the application, and all the complexity around that. When we speak about project in FastPost, it's about the expertise on the accounting, on the process, on really the business end that needs to be configured to the requirement. And I've seen that as a key benefit in getting successful into the project, because instead of trying to make things work, you're trying to address the business challenge of what they're trying to achieve, because the flexibility of the tool enable that, and then you have smart people with grey hair here to help and bring their knowledge. Yeah, cool. I have one last question, and it's always all of this are great, as you say, a lot of experience, and therefore, could you share some of the best practices in terms of control?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really important. Clearly you have to have a good design, a good control framework, etc. But that you will build and put in place. But I think it's really important that the roles and responsibilities and the control ownership is understood. I've seen things go wrong many times in the past because people didn't, while the design was good in terms of the control framework, people didn't really understand their role in it, and so they thought they were doing the right things, but in actual fact they were missing things, and stuff was falling through the cracks. So those roles and responsibilities need to be very clear, both at sort of the operational and at the managerial sort of level, and driven right up to senior management. I think it's really important that senior management are very engaged in this and back this and support this. Certainly in banking, the senior manager regime has helped that. It's made people very, senior managers very focused on their responsibilities and making sure things are done correctly. So that's certainly been an area that's been helpful in that regard. You clearly have to have a very clear and good understanding of the external requirements. So SOX or BCBS 239. Depending on what problem you're trying to solve. And some of these rules and regulations are complex and complicated. So, you need to make sure you've got sufficiently qualified people who understand the rules and the regulations, including some of the regulatory reporting, capital reporting, regulations, which are very complex or can be very complex, and make sure that you're actually building your system and the controls around that to meet those requirements, not to meet something that's close to those requirements, but not actually those requirements. I touched on data quite a few times. Data tends to be a challenge in every organisation. So strong data management controls, governance, your use of data, the processes around what you're doing with data, golden sources of data as much as you can start to create and use, they're absolutely critical. The more you can do to sort your data out and make your data better, the easier the solving the whole problem becomes. And then I think the final thing is a real sort of practical control, which is just your source to balance reconciliations or controls. So if I've got my 100 sitting in my ledger or financial statements, how do I know that I've actually got 100? How do I know, it's 3 lots of 30 and a 10 sitting in 4 different systems, but how do I check that? How do I know that? So looking at that framework and making sure there's ownership around the number in the ledger back to those source systems, which we have their own controls and validations. I think that's a really important or critical area to understand and get correct.
It's definitely always a very nice moment when we speak with banks and we say like, okay, so here are some of the balance, here's some of the outputs, and now let's go down all the way up to the source data and trace really what happened. And people are just like, wow, this is something that we need to do better. So being able to know the end and the beginning is not an easy task, and many banks are trying to improve that kind of traceability across the whole accounting process.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think I think you're comparing that with a lot of organisations have sort of legacy accounting. It's almost black box built off their transaction ledgers, and that it's very difficult to interrogate that and to get into that and understand what actually is driving that. And it's also very difficult to change it. If you get new rules or regulations come along and you need to make changes, that can be very challenging as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, Stuart. I think this brings us to the end of today's Meet the Banking Experts. So I just want to say a big thank you. And maybe do you have any concluding thoughts for our viewers today?
No, I'll just say, these are challenging programs to get this right, but you have to take the first step. So I think you once the problem is there and recognised, I think getting that thought process right, getting the roadmap right, and embarking on it and setting off on that journey is a really important thing to do. But do that with the right support around you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stuart. So, yes, as I said, this brings us to an end. You see at the bottom, there is a small email address where you can book a one-to-one with one of our advisors. So it's info@legerityfinancials.com. And just a last word about FastPost. FastPost is really the next generation accounting rules platform. It's designed and developed for large volume of complicated data, as Stuart mentioned, and processes. We differentiate ourselves from the market as being a cloud-native, ultra-high-speed performance built with open source technologies and giving control to the finance team. And so if you would like to have more information about how we can improve your control and audit in your accounting process, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, either on our website. There's a few buttons here to book a meeting, or directly on the email info@legerityfinancials.com. Finally, all those webinar sessions, white papers that we publish are accessible on our website or on LinkedIn, so don't hesitate to follow us on LinkedIn. On that note, I just want to say a big thank you to Stuart, and thank you for everybody who attended today. Have a good rest of the week. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
FastPost is the next generation accounting rules platform. Cloud native, ultra high performance, developed using the latest open source technologies for large volumes of complicated data and processes. Finance departments are under pressure. Legacy systems are creaking, inefficient, and error-prone. Forward-looking CFOs are driving change. Finance today is more than just accounting. Multiple stakeholders, clients, regulatory challenges, and the new digital world need a single version of the truth. Granular, accounting-validated data on demand. FastPost is modular, fully integrated with open interfaces and APIs, and the ability for user-defined business rules. Setting the standard for the next generation of accounting rules and subledger technology. We shorten processing time from days or hours to minutes. Offered both as a software and platform as a service, providing flexible and rapid deployment options to match your business needs. FastPost. Finance with confidence. Legerity. It's our business to take care of yours.